Saudi Arabia faces international strife and economic uncertainty. Is Mohammed bin Salman the solution? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is Saudi Arabia's new crown prince. Mohammed bin Salman is said to be a wild card in the royal deck. While his political portfolio includes special advisor to the king and defense minister, he's only 31 years old, with 2 decades less experience than his predecessor. He's also seen by many as a self-styled reformer, promising to move the economy away from its dependence on oil. Now, critics say such changes will destabilize the region. And then there are the Saudi-backed airstrikes in Yemen. Salman has orchestrated the operation for years, with the condemnation of rights groups over the killing of scores of civilians. So what is Saudi Arabia's future with Salman as their heir apparent? Randolph Nogel has more.
He's seen by many as the face of the future. The anointment of 31-year-old Mohammed bin Salman as crown prince was a seismic generational shift in a line that has transferred power between men in their 70s and 80s. The young prince has a vision for a new Saudi Arabia, one which doesn't solely rely on its vast oil resources.
We are very excited about these changes. We are happy that new blood, youth, are taking the lead to lead the government.
صحينا والله على قرارات الصراحة مفاجئة، لكن قد تكون يعني تمد مستقبل للشباب وقيادات شابة ناجحة في المستقبل.
Mohammed bin Salman rose to prominence when his father became king in 2015. He was promptly named defense minister, the youngest in the world. He would go on to accrue a vast portfolio of appointments, something which would give him the nickname Mr. Everything. Now, a step away from the throne, his mandate to enforce his plan, named Vision 2030, is considerable. It aims to diversify the Saudi economy and cut unemployment, now in double digits. But some fear the king's youngest son may be moving too fast, portending a showdown with the kingdom's hardline religious establishment, which has lent Saudi royals legitimacy for more than a century. And while Mohammed bin Salman will attempt to walk a delicate line at home, his critics say he hasn't been quite so cautious in his foreign policy at a time of great uncertainty in the region.
I want to thank Saudi Arabia and my friend King Salman and all of the countries who participated in that very historic summit.
In the wake of the Arab Islamic American Summit in Riyadh, the entire region's power dynamics have shifted. Saudi Arabia has led a campaign to economically corner Qatar, a country that hosts the second largest U.S. military base in the region.
There is no blockade of Qatar. Qatar is free to go. The ports are open, the airports are open.
But it's the timing of Mohammed bin Salman's ascension that raises a number of questions.
There's clearly a relationship among Qatar, Trump's visit, the Saudi leadership changes. They all go together in one package. Mohammed bin Salman is somebody who has cultivated the American Trump administration very intensely and personally with visits there.
And while he's been praised as a reformer in the West, BND, the German intelligence agency, published a memo last year portraying Mohammed bin Salman as a political gambler who's destabilizing the Arab world through proxy wars in Yemen and Syria. The Crown Prince was the architect of the Saudi military offensive against Houthi rebels in Yemen, which Riyadh accuses of being Tehran's proxies. He's ruled out any chance of dialogue with Iran, citing Shia's belief in the return of Imam Mahdi. As evidence, Tehran is trying to control the Muslim world. For those who want reform in the kingdom, Mohammed bin Salman has provided some hope. But for those who want peace in the region, there are concerns that the young prince may prove to be not quite so amicable. Randolph Nogel, The Newsmakers.
Joining me now from Istanbul is Khaled Mbatarfi. He is a columnist at the Saudi Gazette. In Washington, D.C., Ali Al-Ahmed, the director of the Institute for Gulf Affairs, and Republican political commentator Charlie Wolf joins us from London. Thanks all so much for being here. So we've heard opinions vary widely over the new Saudi crown prince. Some say he is the newer, younger leadership that Saudi actually needs. Others say he's an inexperienced, reckless political liability. Ali Al-Ahmed, let me ask you where you stand.
Well, I think it's very clear that at 31 years of age, Mohammed bin Salman has taken over a multitude of positions, over 30 positions in the country, having basically control all of these positions. No one can, even an experienced person, can handle these duties. Obviously, Mohammed bin Salman has no experience to speak of, and having all of these powers in different directions shows that he is power hungry, and he wants to have control over all of these government facets. That's not going to be good. Obviously, no one is able to be so brilliant at this young age and holding all of these positions that are not connected to each other. We are looking at a disaster in the making.
So do you think his predecessor then, Crown Prince bin Naif, was infinitely better?
I don't know if you want to say one is better than the other, because you're giving two bad choices. So it's false choice when you give two choices. Mohammed bin Naif has many problems, but he was a security-minded individual who only knew or understood that he should crush his opponents. And he has a laundry list of abuses. So I don't know if he was able to do other things, but in the country, I think people see Mohammed bin Salman is the lesser of two evils comparative to Mohammed bin Naif. And the reason that it was easy for Mohammed bin Salman to take over and push Mohammed bin Naif out was the abhorrent record of Mohammed bin Naif and the much hatred, the widespread hatred of Mohammed bin Naif in the country from the people.
Khaled Batarfi, is this new crown prince simply the lesser of two evils, or is he actually something good for Saudi Arabia, particularly given his youth?
Well, for Mr. Ali Al-Ahmed to say all this hatred about the two princes is expected. He is representing the Shiite opposition abroad, but I didn't expect him to be so hateful of our leadership. Both are great men who serve their countries very well. Saudi Arabia is one of the top 20 economies in the world and is the leader of the Muslim and the Arab world, whether they like it in the Iran camp or they don't. We don't care, really. Mohammed bin Salman is the Amir of the Shabab, the Amir of the youth. He is the future of Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia is turning 100 years old now and going into the next millennium of its history, and they needed a young generation. In the past, they were calling the same opposition, the same people, including Brother Ali Al-Ahmed, were saying the leadership is aging and they are not fit to lead the country and we need new blood. And now that we have the new blood and the new leadership, they are saying they are inexperienced. Well, they proved themselves well in every file they took. And Mohammed bin Salman is not working alone at all. He is working with teams of experienced people, whether in the defense ministry or in the development and economic departments, or also in the diplomacy. We have Adil Jabir, we have experienced generals. So he is not working alone at all, and he is also working for his father, who is a very experienced man.
Ali Al-Ahmed, I'll let you respond quickly.
Well, I'm not surprised by the xenophobic Saudi spokesperson. This is part and parcel to the Saudi regime. what I want to highlight, because this is a Turkish station, that the only religious group, Muslim group, that has called the Turkish state as infidel, as polytheist, is the Saudi religious authority. No Muslim ever spoke this way about the Turkish state. And this has happened by a Saudi minister and the head of the Imam Mohammed bin Saud University, Abu al-Khail. And it's on tapes and video. So to speak of somebody's sect and I say who are representing this and Shia and Sunni, this is really, it speaks to the Saudi nature and the mindset. And you know, I don't want to talk about this anymore, because this is not about sex and so on. This is about a country where people are not allowed to make a position. If this is the Amir of the Shabab, why can't this, or the Prince of the Youth, why can't the people of Saudi Arabia vote to choose him? Because the Saudi government, the monarchy, would not allow the people of the country to give opinion about who is their leader. This is not about how brilliant a person is. If you are so brilliant, why are you bogged in 2 years of war in Yemen that's creating the worst cholera outbreak in the world and sieging a country? Why are you having problems with your neighbor, Qatar? Why are you involved in so many disastrous decisions, losing hundreds of billions of dollars, buying $400 billion of weaponry and services to the United States, while your people, 30% at least, are in poverty, 70% cannot own their own homes, and the economic conditions in Saudi Arabia are so horrid. 80% at least of women in that country are unemployed. These things, you know, that shows you in 80 years after the oil has been exported, Saudi Arabia remains behind its neighbors in terms of all the economic indicators. And this is really what we're talking about. You cannot make just decisions because some guy is good or he's the son of so. This has to be an institutional process, and this is nothing. This is serious business. People die and live on this. This is a whole country, and the results of this decision has been horrendous for the country and its people.
Khaled, to be fair, I'll give you a quick equal time response. Go ahead.
Well, we are used to hear this hate speech usually from Iran and from its agents, Arab agents in the region, and Brother Ali Ahmed is one of them. So I'm not surprised we are hearing that every day.
Well, I'm not surprised people who are coming from outside the country.
Hezbollah, coming from Ansar Allah, coming from Iran. You are using the same even terminology. You are seeing the same numbers, the same words.
I can tell you because it's an identity crisis. Some people suffer from.
It is a cheap attempt to try to put an edge between us and Turkey.
From outside the country,
we are fine, guys, without you and Iran. Thank you very much. I am in Istanbul now, and many Saudis, hundreds of thousands of Saudis, of real Saudis, are here enjoying our warmth of relationship with Turkey.
I would love to continue a debate just between the two of you. Unfortunately, we've got
he's
a lot of
interrupting. I never interrupted him, by the way.
Understood. But I'd like to move on to another topic.
Anyway.
We have limited minutes here, and I'd like to get Charlie into the discussion because, Charlie, many have said that the new Saudi government is really banking on the support of the United States going forward, and that support might not be all that reliable via President Donald Trump himself. I'd like to ask where you stand on that.
I think there could be more support from Donald Trump. A couple things. First off, whether we like it or not, and this is more of an observation than necessarily a political observation, but I think what we call, of course, the millennials, I think are finally starting to take over. And those of us who are a little bit older may not like it, and we may not see their ways, may not like their music, may not like their politics, but if you look, obviously the main advisor to the president is his daughter Ivanka and her husband Jared Kushner, who I'm sure probably had a large hand in this. Look at the Murdoch empire. It seems that Rupert Murdoch, in the running of Fox News, has been bowing to the wishes of his two sons, James and Lachlan.
So
maybe the Saudis are seeing a hint of this as well, with bringing in a younger blood with a vision. I think someone may have mentioned earlier that Mohammed bin Salman is thinking about changing the economy, not relying on oil, which I think is a very smart move. He supposedly, again, he used American parlance, a bit of a rock star amongst those of his generation. There's billboards all around Saudi Arabia. So I don't expect to see human rights breaking out in Saudi Arabia overnight, but this may be the start of a slow progression. And I think most importantly, from a U.S. standpoint, is there's a common enemy with the Iranians and the Iranian regime and development of a nuclear weapon, or possibility of a nuclear weapon. And I think that they see in this man someone who has a bit more of an assertive nature about him that I think probably impresses someone like Donald Trump.
Okay, so you see his age, albeit with its inexperience that it inevitably comes with, as a benefit for Saudi that perhaps an older generation just can't quite relate to just yet. But let me ask you about, let me turn to Ali Al-Ahmed for this, regarding the economy that Charlie just brought up. Oil prices have dropped 20% since January alone. Prince Mohammed now has reform plans to compensate for that lack of revenue. This is all part of his Vision 2030. How do you see that going forward? Can you at least give him credit for having an economic vision that could serve the Saudi youth?
Look, what the American guest said is typical American rehash of the same thing that they read and memorize. This has been happening since the 1960s, when Helen Lawton said that Saudi Arabia is coming on this new transformation. There hasn't been no transformation. When oil prices were above $100, King Abdullah couldn't even build his promised economic cities. This is nothing new from the Saudi broken record. Oh, we're going to have this transformation. We're going to have the gas initiative. We're going to have this initiative. This is nothing new, and nothing came out of these initiatives. We have like at least 15 initiatives before this. And now oil prices are low. The economic situation is way worse than before. The Saudi monarchy is larger, and everyone wants a piece of the cake. They don't have the capacity anymore to do more stuff. They couldn't do it when the oil prices were high. Are they going to be able to do it now? I don't think so. This guy has shown that he cannot do anything right, and he has mouthpieces that have identity crisis because they don't belong to the country. They are recent immigrants, so they are going to say whatever they want. Okay, but the idea is you have foreigners defending the Saudi monarchy, and this has been really the situation that's been happening for 60 years. 80 years after the oil prices, and Saudi Arabia cannot say that they have a solid economy. This is not the first attempt at getting rid of the oil or not depending on the oil. They are not going to be able to do it because the regime itself, the system itself, cannot be reformed, and it's not willing to reform itself, and allowing the people economic freedom, academic freedom, and other freedoms. And you need that for a transformation.
Khaled, I'll let you comment on Vision 2030 going forward. Does the new Crown Prince have a clear economic vision that particularly benefits the Saudi youth, where unemployment is rampant and where discontent is often evident now in Saudi? Can his economic plans going forward change that tide?
I believe so. I'm not a prophet like Brother Ali, who is not only judging the last 80 years, but he's judging the next 80 years and saying it's going to be a failure. I'm hoping that it's going to be a success. We are seeing this success already. In 1 year, the deficit came down 79%. That's a miracle. And the economy is moving ahead. Even the austerity measures were turned back now, and the people working for the government are giving back everything that was taken away from them in the past 7 months, and the economy is doing much better than before, because in the past we were 90% depending on oil income. Now we are down to 80%. And it's getting even less, and that's only in 2 years. The numbers are clear. They can talk for themselves, and experts from around the world, banks who are rushing to give Saudi Arabia what they ask for credits, and at very low interest. And bankers would never be kind and biased in this, because that's money talking, that's their money. And they give Saudi Arabia a great credit by giving them, what they wanted at a very low rate.
Okay, but Khalid, if I can ask you quickly, when he talks about diversifying the economy, the Saudi economy, what is the Crown Prince planning to offer Saudi youth to appease them? Because you must be aware of the discontent.
No, I'm not aware of this discontent.
Even with unemployment running rampant.
Unlike Brother Ali, who chose New York for the last 20 years. No, it's not true. Saudi youth in particular, they are very optimistic. I don't know where you are, but you are not in Saudi Arabia, so you cannot talk for the Saudis or talk about Saudi Arabia as an expert if you are outside. How can you tell if people are happy or unhappy unless you are talking about your own people who believe in al-Wali al-Faqih and Iran? Anyway, I'm saying that the Saudi youth
Wali al-Faqih is no different than Wali al-Malik. Same thing.
They are seeing for the first time, anyway, the Saudis are seeing for the first time, the Saudi youth, that because they are 70% of the population, and in the past they were not well represented, now they are very well represented. Most leaders are on the average of 30 years old, and that's great in a nation like Saudi Arabia. In Canada, we have a young leader. In France, we have a young leader. Why it's too much for Saudi Arabia to have young leadership?
Okay, we only have a few minutes left. Charlie, if you had a response, do go ahead. I'm sorry you've hadn't had a lot of time.
Forgive me, because my sound has been drifting in and out with the tide here, so I've missed a lot of what you had to say. But I think one thing, in response to what the other gentleman said in response to me earlier, one thing that is changing, of course, is the nexus of power. And that is, of course, with the Iranians, as I mentioned before, developing nuclear weapons. In some respects, we can almost, in a very backhanded way, thank Barack Obama for this situation. He was not respected by the Arabs because he did not show steel and metal and leadership. He had this very lead from behind way of thinking. The Saudis, I don't think, respect that. They respect Donald Trump because they see him as a man who is not afraid to use power when it's needed and to take a leadership position. And as I said before, that's what they like about Mohammed bin Salman. And I think the other thing that's going to change now, you may not see it, will be more of an association between the Israelis and the U.S. and the Saudis in trying to balance that power away from the Iranians. And I think that's where the key is, and could maybe lead, I mean, we can only hope, to maybe better things.
Okay. Charlie, I am going to have to give you the last word because very unfortunately we are out of time. I'd like to thank all three of our panelists so much for joining us on the Newsmakers.
I want to once again warn all parties that Gaza is a tinderbox. If and when it explodes, it will have devastating consequences for the population and derail all efforts at advancing peace. 2 million Palestinians in Gaza can no longer be held hostage by divisions. For a decade, they have lived under the control of Hamas. They have had to deal with crippling Israeli closures, Palestinian divisions, and have lived through 3 devastating conflicts.
That warning from the UN comes amid a steady trade-off between alleged Hamas rockets and Israeli airstrikes. On Tuesday, Israeli strikes hit Hamas bases, which the army says were in response to projectile fire from Gaza. This isn't the first time it's happened this year. These pictures show a similar attack in February. Hamas wouldn't give details about any damage that occurred with that latest strike, but a spokesman did say that Israel fabricated claims of Hamas rocket fire. Well, Tuesday's altercation came after another warning, this time by former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak. He told German media that Israel faces a slippery slope toward apartheid. Well, let's talk now with former Israeli Foreign Minister Tzipi Livni. She joins us live from Tel Aviv. Thanks so much for being here. I want to get your comments on Ehud Barak's statement in just a minute, but first, having heard what the United Nations had to say, is Israel standing by to witness the tinderbox that is Gaza exploding soon?
As a minister in the Israeli government, I supported the disengagement plan. Israel left Gaza Strip. We pulled out our forces. We dismantled all the settlements. We uprooted Israelis who live there. And therefore, the fact that this is the situation in Gaza is not because of Israel. It's because of the fact that Hamas controls Gaza Strip, that for more than 10 years, Hamas is not willing to accept the requirements of the quartet, to recognize the right of Israel to exist, to renounce violence and terrorism, and to accept formal agreements, peace treaties between Israel and the Palestinians. And therefore, this is the unfortunate situation. But
well, you can
the
say,
decision of Israel
you
was
can say
to quit.
it's not because of Israel, but it will be Israel's problem if this tinderbox explodes. What is Israel going to do?
Yes, I agree that in the end it can be our problem, as it is our problem that Hamas is targeting our civilians. I believe that the right thing to do is to try and make a difference, a distinction between Hamas as a terrorist organization, as an administration in Gaza, and the people in Gaza. And therefore, Israel allow not only humanitarian food, but all the products that are needed in Gaza to enter into Gaza quite freely. But I agree that the situation is very complex. In the end of the last operation of Gaza, I said that the best thing to do is, firstly, as I said, to distinguish Hamas from the people,
but Hamas
and to help the people.
Understood.
And,
but in the meantime,
Hamas also to.
Hamas is there for Israel to deal with, whether Israel likes it or not. And Hamas says it's changing. It says it is an evolving institution. They issued a new charter a few months ago accepting the state of Israel, but not the occupation. I'd like you to listen to what Hamas's former leader Khalid Mashal actually had to say. Okay. And I want you to tell me if you find him sincere.
Hamas is changing. It's evolving. Like any organism, it has vitality, and it regenerates, has its own personality, and has a future. This is normal, and we are proud of this. What Hamas presented is a document, not a charter. The first charter of Hamas was in 1988. Now we have a document in 2017. This reflects the natural evolution of Hamas's political thought and performance. In the political document, it presents a balanced, creative, and authentic mode.
Is this an evolving organization that eventually Israel can deal with?
When Hamas renounced violence and terrorism, accept the right of Israel to exist, and accept and abide former agreements between Israel and the Palestinians, the answer is yes. But this is not what's happening now, unfortunately. I mean, Hamas is talking about a Palestinian state 67 line, but is not willing to say that this would be the end of conflict. The whole idea is to try and bring an end to an ongoing conflict between us and the Palestinians based on two states for two peoples. Each state gives an answer to national aspiration of different peoples.
But according to them, their new charter says they are working for that they are working to recognize the two-state solution.
But they are not.
Go ahead.
Well, it didn't happen yet. I'm waiting. It didn't happen yet. I'm waiting. I hope that they would accept and understand that terror is not the right way to act, and they would accept the right of Israel to exist.
So if you
it's not there yet. Hopefully they would bring that.
And you will work with Hamas in that case. When you hear the wording you want from its leadership, you will work with Hamas.
I want to emphasize that it's not the words that I want. It's something that the entire international community put on the table. And the requirements are not Israel's requirements, it's the quartet requirements. Renounce violence of terrorism, accept the right of Israel to exist, and accepting the peace treaties between Israel and the Palestinians. It's there. they can be legitimized by answering to all these parameters, requests, and conditions. Until now, they are not doing so. If they are moving toward this, fine, but it's too early to know, and until now, unfortunately, they are still using terror.
Let me ask you, though, if you accept some of the blame for the deteriorating situation, particularly given what we heard from Ehud Barak. He says Israel is on that slippery slope toward an apartheid state. We actually have a graphic with the statement that he made, saying if we keep controlling the whole area from the Mediterranean to the River Jordan, where some 13 million people are living, then 8 million Israelis and 5 million Palestinians, if only one entity reigns over this whole area named Israel, it will become inevitably either non-Jewish or non-democratic. This is Israel's role to play.
Ehud Barak and me share the same ideology and the same views and the same policy. We want not only to promote, but we are preaching for the idea of dividing the land and creating two different states. One is Israel, as I said, and the other is the Palestinian state. Because we believe, both of us, that this represents the only way to represent the nature and the values of Israel as a Jewish democratic state. Now, both of us would not accept, and we would make all the efforts here in Israel with vast majority of Israelis that would not support an apartheid state, and therefore Israel would not be an apartheid state. But I do agree that we need to continue, preach and fight, and I mean politically, and hopefully make decisions toward the idea of two states for two peoples.
I have to ask you honestly, though, how realistic is the two-state solution? Some criticize that you are just talking about it because you have to, when in your heart you know that Israeli politics, Israeli people are far too divided to ever accept an independent Palestinian state. Go ahead.
Because I have to. The best thing for me to politically is to say no chance for two states for two peoples, and let's just manage the conflict. I mean, I'm doing what I believe is the right thing for the future of the state of Israel. I believe that not everything is a zero-sum game between us and the Palestinians. And most important, there is an opportunity now. We have President Trump saying that he wants a deal. Nobody wants to say no to President Trump. We have the Sunni Arab states, those who want and understand that Iran and Daesh and the others are their threat, but they want to see Israel moving toward the Palestinians, hopefully achieving peace with the Palestinians. So this can change the entire region. If both leaders in Israel, Netanyahu, on the Palestinian side, Mahmoud Abbas, would make the right decision and would take bold steps in order to do so. So I believe that there is an opportunity now, and I would continue in Israel to preach for it, to support it, and support politically if Netanyahu would make also the right decisions in Israel.
Do you think part of the problem is Netanyahu himself and his very hawkish policies that have been so pervasive over the last decade now?
You know, as you know, I'm in the opposition in Israel, but we negotiated with the Palestinians in 2013, 2014, and Netanyahu accepted the idea of an American framework for negotiations. And therefore, what is needed now is to put both of them, Netanyahu and Mahmoud Abbas, in a kind of decision-making. And what President Trump needs to do is what Obama didn't do. And this is to put the paper on the paper, and both of them will be tested. And therefore, it's not about what I think, it's about decision-making. And I believe that this is moment for decisions.
Okay. Given your optimism, is there any chance, or is it over? Or is the return to conflict with Hamas and Gaza, is that in the past? Or do you leave that door open if you feel Hamas does not change its ways in the way that you've laid out today?
You know, it's not about feeling whether Hamas changed their ways. We feel it. When they target Israel, when they are targeting our civilians, we feel it. I hope that both sides would not lead to escalation and deterioration. Sometimes we saw in different parts of the world miscalculation. I hope that the situation would not deteriorate. I mean, for the future of the people in Israel and the people in Gaza. I hope not, but I think that this depends on both sides. So as long as they are not targeting Israel, they are not using terror against Israel, Israel would not initiate a war in Gaza. All we do, and this is what we did in the past, is trying to defend our citizens. So hopefully we would not see deterioration.
Okay.
But you know, it's the Middle East.
Tzipi Livni, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us. Shortages of food and medicine, coupled with a staggering murder rate, are driving thousands of Venezuelans out of the country. Human rights campaigners are calling them refugees. And in fact, many of those already in Brazil say they're not shopping for supplies, but starting a new life. Critics say the response to the mass migration has been meager at best. Brazil is more likely to deport those begging on the street than to offer assistance. And while the United Nations has increased its presence on the border, there's no emergency plan in place. Here's Shoaib Hassan with more.
These Venezuelans are fleeing a desperate situation as their country descends into chaos, escaping into neighboring Brazil and into camps like this one.
My women go begging for money at each traffic light. Then we meet and we buy food that we send to our family members in Venezuela.
Rights groups say thousands have been driven out due to the massive economic crises in the country. It's led to food shortages and bouts of violence. It's also led to an exodus to Brazil and neighboring Chile and Uruguay. That's why the main regional Latin American cooperation body, the Organization of American States, or OAS, has stepped in.
In the week ahead, we will update with a status on the situation of repression in Venezuela, the increase in political prisoners, the killings, the systematic incidents on rights by the state, and the complaints on the political conditions the country is going through, such as the pre-trial of the main prosecutor and with the military.
All that is fueled by a political deadlock, and at the center is President Nicolas Maduro. Nicolas Maduro has been in power since 2013, following the death of iconic leader Hugo Chavez. The political crisis began in 2015 after opposition parties took control of the parliament. But Maduro moved to appoint Supreme Court judges who have blocked all legislation by the body. That's led to a deadlock on official decision-making. It's also exacerbated the economic conditions that were already in disarray due to the effect of falling oil prices. Fuel is Venezuela's main source of income. Maduro has criticized the OAS's attempt to address the crisis.
The attack on Venezuela must end. Venezuela will not recognize in any way anything that comes out of the Organization of American States.
It means that for now, things are unlikely to change here, and locals will continue to flee. Shoaib Hassan, the Newsmakers.
Let's talk more about this with our panel. Joining me from London is journalist and Latin American analyst Javier Farge, and Andrea Murta is in Washington, D.C. She's the Atlantic Council's Associate Director of its Latin America Center. Thanks both so much for joining us. Let me just ask where you both stand. Andrea, is Brazil facing a refugee crisis?
Well, not in absolute numbers yet. The situation is not so dire that Brazil would have a huge crisis if it was doing its job of receiving these refugees from Venezuela well enough. Brazil has been immersed in its own political and economic crisis and has been paying little attention to the situation in Venezuela, which is probably going to get a lot worse in the coming months and years if things continue as they are. And Brazil really needs an emergency plan, much like Colombia has been doing for years now, and doing a much better job of receiving Venezuelans that are trying to escape the dire situations that they're in the country.
So Brazil does need to manage it better, Andrea, but Venezuela and its problems are fueling this situation.
Oh, absolutely. Venezuela is in a terrible, terrible situation that's getting really worse by the day. The numbers of deaths, of malnutrition, the shortages of medicine. People are dying and starving in Venezuela, and they're dying in pain because they have no medicine to take care of their illnesses. And all of this flow of refugees into Brazil is really putting a very hard stress on areas of the border that are really not prepared to receive all this. These are poor areas. In some of the cities on the border, we already have 80% of patients in the hospitals that are Venezuelan. This is inside of Brazil. And it's been getting a lot worse. The state of Roraima, which is on the border, is seeing a huge increase in the number of people asking for asylum, asking to be considered refugees. That's not even to count the people that come in and buy supplies and food and return to Venezuela. But let me just give you an example for you to understand the atrocity of the numbers here. In 2014, not that long ago, there were only 9 Venezuelans that requested Brazil for refugee status. And then in 2016, we have 2,230 Venezuelans asking for this status. And now this year, up until February, federal police in Roraima was scheduling 200 interviews a day for people asking for economic refugee status. And there are 4,000 others waiting in line to be received by the authorities in Brazil to see if they can help with their situation.
Okay.
So it's not only bad, but it's getting a lot worse.
Javier Farge, is Venezuela failing its people and fueling thousands of refugees over the Brazilian border?
First of all, I would be very reluctant to call them refugees. I was in Venezuela a month and a half ago. I was in Caracas a month and a half ago, and I had the opportunity to meet and talk to a lot of people, both from the opposition and the government side. Only the people who can afford to leave the country go away. Most poor people, many of those people who live in the shanty towns surrounding Caracas, in this particular case, like El Petare, cannot afford to leave the country. Second, it is true there's a huge shortage of supplies, of medical supplies and food. There is a community project that has been implemented to be able to provide Venezuelans of those articles, of those produce in which Venezuela is self-sufficient, to replace those in which there's a big shortage because they have to import that. At the same time, the violence perpetrated by these gangs of violent thugs who claim to represent the opposition, let's not forget that most people in the opposition are demonstrating peacefully and making the situation even worse, because it's very difficult for people from the shanty towns in Caracas, in this particular case El Petare, and I'm telling you, I saw this with my own eyes, very difficult for them to go to the city and try to queue for food or try to go to work because they are considered Chavistas. And there's a lot of testimonies of attacks by these violent gangs against these people who they consider Chavistas because of the color of their skin or because they declare themselves that they are supporters of the government. At the same time, the low prices in the international markets of oil have made it very difficult for President Maduro to manage the situation. No, even this organization called Interlaces, which is an independent pollster, which has reached the conclusion based on an independent research that most Venezuelans don't want regime change. They don't want the change of government. They want the government to solve the situation, and they do not believe, 63% do not believe that the opposition will be in a position to solve the current economic crisis. The problem here at the moment, apart from the elements of inefficiency from the government, I'm not going to deny that, is the fact that this violence is making things even worse. The distribution of food is making things even worse, something that happened in Allende's Chile in 1973 before the coup that brought him down. At the same time, those community attempts, those community groups that have been trying to work to create local markets to be able to supply food for people, and and those issues and those produce. So yes, there's a lot of elements here, not only the government, but a lot of elements here.
And Andrea, there's a lot to take in there. Let me ask if you do take any of Javier's points. And I have heard some make the comparison that these, what some human rights organizations call refugees flowing into Brazil, are actually the equivalent of many Mexicans that cross the border into the United States looking for work and fleeing desperately terrible poverty as well as violence in Mexico. Do you take that comparison?
Some of them could be, because criminality is one of the reasons why people are trying to escape Venezuela. I think that the conditions in Venezuela are much, much worse than in Mexico, actually. And honestly, I find it mind-boggling and heartbreaking that we're still stuck in discussing politics instead of accepting help and acknowledging that the help that is needed in Venezuela is an urgent and emergential situation. So this is just mind-boggling to me. If the Maduro government is so sure of the support of their people and that no one else can solve their problems, that's fine. Then let's just hold elections. There were municipal elections scheduled to happen last year that they postponed indefinitely. There was a recall referendum that they had more than enough signatures to be held that they refused to acknowledge and hold. There is no schedule for real elections coming up. The next thing that they're going to do is have a constitutional assembly that they're going to fill up with their own people to make sure that Maduro stays in power. And it's not true that we have 60 or more % of the people wanting Maduro to stay. There's a situation, even for Chavistas, even for people that were supporters of PSUV, the situation is so dire that they are against the government as well. And the approval rates for Maduro are in the close to the single digits or low of the 10%, 20% tops. And this is a situation where it really wasn't like this just a few years ago, because Venezuela used to be a polarized, divided country, and no longer. Now everybody understands that the situation just cannot go on as it is. The question of classifying people as refugees, I honestly find also that's not the important situation. There are humanitarian organizations that are calling for Brazil to accept that status so that it makes it easier for people escaping poverty and disease and criminality to be accepted into Brazil or into Colombia. Human Rights Watch has called for this. The Commissariat for Refugees of the UN is working with Brazil. Brazilians are also asking the government, many organizations, to accept them as refugees. But the important thing here is not that classification, is that we help these people, and that the Maduro government accept that there is an emergency and accept help that is being offered repeatedly from abroad just to bring food and medicine into the country. And they're not accepting that at the moment. So I don't see how we can really put the situation into a political divide when people are just dying.
Javier, go ahead. I see you have a response.
Sorry. First of all, correction. This 60% I mentioned is by Interlaces, which is a credible pollster in Venezuela, first of all. And not only that, the latest opinion poll says that 80% of people are against violence and 79% people believe that those who are responsible should go to prison, whether they are Chavistas or not. Second, I have serious problems with the credibility of Human Rights Watch, an organization that tried to get money from Saudi Arabia, an organization that completely ignored the military coup in Honduras in 2009 to such an extent that a group of intellectuals sent a letter to protest. They are quite partisan about this, so I have serious problems about the credibility of Human Rights Watch. In relation to the Constituent Assembly that you have mentioned, I had a meeting together with all the international visitors with the Presidential Commission of the Constituent Assembly, and I expressed my doubts about certain elements of this Constituent Assembly. And first of all, this is not an assembly, a Constituent Assembly to extend the power of the administration all the time of President Maduro in power. That is not true. This is a reform of the current constitution, the 1999 constitution, to introduce, among other things, a post-oil economy and to institutionalize the misiones, these community-based organizations that have done a great deal of work in terms of housing, in terms of education, in terms of health, which in this particular case is difficult because of the lack and shortage of medicine. So it is not true that this Constituent Assembly is being organized in order to make sure that President Maduro stays in power. That is not the issue in this Constituent Assembly. It is a reform of the current constitution. The President Maduro has no intention whatsoever to use this Constituent Assembly to stay in power longer than he should be. So that is actually, and that is one of the problems I have with the coverage of international media in relation to what happens to Venezuela. They keep on talking about he wants to stay in power, he wants to stay in power. They either ignore the details of the proposal for the Constituent Assembly, or they try to manipulate it in order to make believe that he wants to stay in power longer than he should. This is a reform of the current constitution, a constitution, by the way, that Constituent Assembly, by the way, that the president is entitled to call.
Okay. Andrea, I know you disagree with, if not all, of Javier's political points that he made there, but I do need to refocus the discussion here on the people that are suffering, those that have crossed the border from Venezuela into Brazil. And I'd like to ask about Brazil now. Brazil does not have the infrastructure to manage this. So how much is Brazil at fault here for not helping these people in need, and how much is the international community at fault for not stepping up to the plate to help Brazil better manage this situation?
Well, I think that the situation really requires a coordinated international effort to organize the reception of these people that are fleeing Venezuela. Brazil is, especially on the areas in the border that are receiving these refugees or these people escaping, however you want to call them, is really a poor state. They do not have the health infrastructure or the social infrastructure to house people, to receive them well. They had problems with the health system just for Brazilians before this crisis even started. So it's really hard. The state of Roraima has declared emergency late last year to ask the federal governments for funds to help receiving the Venezuelans and the overburden that they are putting on the structures of the area. But it's something that the whole world should be paying attention, and the whole world should be working together to support the Venezuelan people that are trying to flee.
I'll let you have the last word. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Javier Farge and Andrea Murta joining us there. Thank you so much for being on this edition of the Newsmakers. That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Andrea Sankey. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.